Alright, good morning ladies and gentlemen, it's Mr. Dunn. It's everybody's favorite cellular respiration, so let's get moving. Alright guys, so cellular respiration is basically what all life does to turn food into energy. What we do is we convert biochemical energy into ATP. By biochemical energy, I mean things like carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. Alright, cellular respiration in a eukaryote is carried out by the cell's mitochondria. You guys probably remember the mitochondria from a few units back. It's this power plant of the cell. It's got a bunch of little squiggly lines in it. Alright, sometimes cellular respiration is called aerobic respiration because it uses oxygen. Aerobic means atmosphere in Greek, or just air. Alright, we've seen this before too, but it's always good to emphasize this. Here is the equation for cellular respiration. Basically, over on the left we got our inputs and we got our outputs on the right. And ultimately, from the beginning to the end, we start with glucose. We have to take in oxygen. That allows the cell to burn that glucose or break it down. And our byproducts are water, which we just reabsorb, carbon dioxide, which as humans we breathe out, and this is what really after right here, a whole bunch of ATP or energy. Sometimes it's confused with physiological respiration, but they're not exactly the same thing. When we're talking about physiology or humans breathing, we sometimes refer to that as respiration. One of the big reasons for that is that we take in oxygen, we exchange it in our cells and in the bloodstream, and we breathe out carbon dioxide. So really, physiological respiration is necessary for cellular respiration because that's where we're going to get our oxygen, and that's how we're going to get rid of our carbon dioxide. Alright, let's talk a bit about the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell once again. It's the site of cellular respiration, but this structure right here has really specific functions to it. Okay, so we're going to look at all the different pieces here and see what's going on in there. Alright, just to kind of reiterate it though, ultimately again, glucose, oxygen are going in, ATP, water, and carbon dioxide are coming out. But where are they going into and what are they coming out of? Alright, so it's made up, the mitochondria is made up of a couple different membranes here. We've got our outer membrane and we got our inner membrane, and the inner membrane is bigger, so that causes it to kind of fold into this middle space here. And in between the outer and inner membrane here, we've got a fluid-filled area called the intermembrane space, and that's really important for the production of ATP later on. Those little folds on the inside are called cristae, and the cristae give a greater surface area to the inner membrane because something called the electron transport chain occurs there. And then on the inside we have our matrix, which is where the Krebs cycle of cellular respiration takes place. It's also known as the citric acid cycle. So a lot of people have heard of the Krebs cycle. It gets kind of a bad name, but it's not that bad. Cellular respiration is divided into three main stages. Okay, the first stage is called glycolysis. The second stage is called the Krebs cycle. And the third stage is called electron transport, sometimes known as oxidative phosphorylation, which is a big term, which is why we're going to go with electron transport. Now, glycolysis occurs in the cell's cytoplasm. It doesn't actually occur in the mitochondria. So in the cytosol, or all that juicy liquid inside, that's where glycolysis is going to take place. And that has to happen before it enters into the mitochondria, specifically into the matrix, where it's going to go through the Krebs cycle. And from the matrix, it's going to move to the inner membrane, and it's going to kind of occur across this inner membrane between the matrix and the inner membrane space for electron transport. Alright, cellular respiration is kind of broken down like this. We start in the cytoplasm with glycolysis, and we begin with one molecule of glucose. We send that glucose through glycolysis, and it releases ATP, a high-energy compound called NADH, and that glucose is split into two 3-carbon pyruvic acids. Alright, from there, those pyruvic acids bind with an enzyme and create this thing called acetyl-CoA, which then travels into the mitochondrial matrix and goes through the Krebs cycle. In the Krebs cycle, it produces carbon dioxide gas, some ATP, and two other energy molecules, NADH and FADH2. Okay, from there, that NADH from Krebs cycle and from the glycolysis and the FADH move into the inner membrane of the mitochondria, where they go through the electron transport chain. They're combined with oxygen at that point, and they create water and a whole bunch of ATP. So there you have it. That is cellular respiration in a nutshell. But if we break it down just using the things in the equation, this is what it looks like, or in the equation. So in glycolysis, that's where glucose comes in and produces some ATP. In Krebs cycle, that's where we produce our carbon dioxide byproduct or waste and some ATP. And in the electron transport, that's where oxygen is going to come in, where we're also going to produce our water and our ATP. So if we look at that equation again, it is glucose plus oxygen makes ATP, carbon dioxide, and water. And then we just have to fill in the steps in between. Okay, last but not least, how much ATP do we actually produce in this process? And it's a surprising amount. So just one molecule of glucose will give us quite a bit. In glycolysis, it nets 2 ATP, so we get 2 ATP out of the deal. In the Krebs cycle, we get 2 ATP out of the deal, but we also create that NADH and FADH2, which then go to the electron transport chain and help that produce a whopping 34 ATP. So in cellular respiration, that aerobic process, we create 38 ATP total.